Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webcast, Shattering the Myths of Lean Manufacturing. Today, we will identify misconceptions that can muddy the implementation of lean thinking and practices. We will offer practical advice for planning and executing a lean initiative that delivers material financial improvements and tangible efficiency gains. I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. First, we have Parmesh Bhaskaran, Managing Director in our Chicago office. Parmesh has more than 20 years of experience in management consulting, project management and engineering, food manufacturing, and sourcing. Clients profit from his areas of expertise such as procurement, operations improvement, and supply chain optimization. Next, we have Steve Hilgendorf, Managing Director, also based in our Chicago office. Steve has more than 25 years of industry and advisory experience with a successful record of running global operations and is particularly recognized for his leadership in sectors with strong technology components. Finally, we have Ashray Sani, Senior Vice President in our New York office. Ashray has over a decade of industry and advisory experience in supply chain and manufacturing operations. He is a core member of AlixPartners' global service offering in footprint optimization. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly cover some housekeeping items. All attendees have been placed on mute upon entry. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available for viewing after the session. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to comment on the session. However, if you'd like to submit a question, which we'll get to at the end of this webinar, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. This is located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and it says Q&A with 2 chat bubbles. Now, I'd like to hand it over to you, Parmesh.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Lean is a very, very powerful tool if used correctly. It is typically touted as a means of generating cash that flow to the bottom line. But in many cases, what we have seen is this does not materialize to the bottom line, or they take longer than one thought it would require to impact the financial results. Several factors combine to slow the speed and blunt the financial impact of lean initiatives that we will cover in the presentation. However, what we have noticed is that there is certain skepticism associated with lean implementation. It does not generate rapid and material payoffs. It does make operations efficient, but less agile and adaptable. It piles on overhead, adds a lot of overhead cost, as you have to hire more people to implement lean. Is that if all that's needed for lean implementation, what we have seen is companies, sometimes it appears to be a fad. So we will talk a little bit about how you should think about lean implementation. Lean, if implemented right, can provide step changes in performance, and that is where AlixPartners is extremely good with helping clients. Next slide, please. A successful lean implementation depends on how it is organized and executed. And for doing that, it starts with the management. They need to set a clear set of priorities, establish the scope and projects that orchestrate the implementation, examine each project for its cash impact, and set measurable targets. One of the important things is you need to measure the progress, how the projects are going, hold people accountable, and focus has to be on cash. One of the key things that we have found out is setting up a project management office or a PMO and tightly orchestrating and coordinating all the transformation activities is one of the key enablers to drive a successful lean implementation. Focusing on the high benefit opportunities first and avoiding high dollar capital investments that have no clear ROI targets are also some of the key things that we look at when we are implementing lean projects. I will hand over to my colleague Ashray to take it from here.
Thanks, Parmesh. Now, one of the things I've seen companies do is try and avoid lean implementation because they fear that if they become too lean, they may get disrupted by a competitor or face a macroeconomic event. Now, this could manifest itself in a couple of ways. A company may carry more inventory than it needs to, or may add more product complexity than what is required. At AlixPartners, we believe in just the opposite. A successful lean program can help companies navigate competitor threats or face economic disruptions. We don't have to look too far. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. Now, one of companies that I recently worked with operated a few manufacturing plants in its network. Some of these plants had adopted lean as part of their culture, while there were others that had not adopted lean to the same extent. And it was easy to see that the ones that had adopted lean were better coping with the disruption caused by the pandemic. Now, when I say disruption, I mean these plants were facing normal, higher than average turnover rates, employee turnover rates, and employee absenteeism. And it's easy to see that if a company has adopted lean as part of its culture, it has the right processes and tracks the right metrics, so it's able to perform more efficiently even with lesser resources, while a plant that has not adopted lean as part of its culture is not able to do the same. So lean, if implemented right, does make you more agile, but it requires a cultural change. It requires you to upgrade your processes, your governance structures, and most importantly, requires you to upgrade your people skill set. Now, all of this requires some cash. So it makes it all the more important that when we're implementing lean, we tie the results of the lean program to the financial results of either the plant or the organization. Now, in the next slide, I talk about how we could have a successful lean program without causing a massive overhead burden. I recently worked with a company mid-sized that was being disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic and was looking at lean as a tool to get back to profitability. As you can imagine, this company did not have the financial means to hire lean engineers in each one of its manufacturing facilities or stand up a multi-year lean program like a Fortune 100 company might be able to do. How do you advise a company in this scenario? At AlixPartners, we take a very pragmatic approach to this problem. This company had hundreds of improvement projects all over the place, not delivering the results that was expected from them. The first thing we did was get the leadership to focus on the top 5 to 10 projects that deliver the maximum financial benefit. At the same time, we got people from their organization to train, like cross-train on the projects that we were implementing. By doing that, not only were we delivering immediate cash, but we were also starting up a multi-wave program that would accelerate future cash savings. So this was a little bit about how lean can help you improve your plan's performance. But there are certain aspects of a plan's performance that are not addressed by lean. To speak about that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Steve.
Thank you, Ashray. Just a couple things to consider, right? There are many aspects of the P&L that are often not directly touched by some of the standard lean tools and approach. And if you're really going to do a complete transformation, you need to make sure you're addressing all of these aspects. As an example, some of the key management processes, we already talked about the need for senior management to be fully engaged and to drive the accountability through the organization. And that goes, also applies to the management processes that are used to run the company. It needs to become part of how you run the operations. So they need to be transformed as well. There may be different talents and skill sets needed on the team that need to be addressed. And we have to take a look at all the supporting business processes are likely to need to change to be adapt to the leaner organization, such as the planning processes, the budgeting processes. And you need to take a close look at the overhead. The standard lean toolkit does a very good job of addressing direct labor and a lot of quality issues, but it doesn't as directly address some of the overhead and support functions. So this needs to be a conscious part of the overall transformation. You need to take a close look at that. Another aspect to consider is that the lean has a very bottoms-up approach, addressing things from the floor, which gives a great sustainability and addressing things that are affecting the floor every day. But as a result, it's a very incremental process, if taken literally, and it sometimes doesn't as quickly address some of the broader systemic issues. So taking a parallel look at the prioritizing things in kind of a data-driven approach to identify these large systemic issues allows you to push the transformation much quicker and address these issues and gain more momentum. Also, of course, lean was originally developed for more high volume, discrete fabrication and assembly manufacturing. It's not as quick, automatically and quickly adaptable to some more job shop, highly engineered product and process environments. So you need to get thoughtful on how you leverage the tools in those environments. So as an example, also take into account if it largely focused on the direct labor content, depending on your cost structure, you may be leaving a lot of money on the table. Many products have, labor content that's 10 or 15% of the overall cost. And if you're in a low-cost country environment, that could be even less. And be careful about the trade-off of adding certain support functions to lean things on the floor, like material handling and other aspects. Some of those other functions can actually be more expensive in some low-cost countries. So be sure you take a look at the complete cost structure and addressing the overhead, and not addressing some of the big cost buckets like material costs, right? So their situation can be different. Use the tools where they're necessary, but be sure you're taking a complete look to address all aspects of your P&L. Next slide, please. I want to make a few comments about what we typically see, why lean transformation programs and initiatives don't always deliver the results they're expected. We often step into the middle of what has been an ongoing, years-long effort to use lean to turn around a company, and it's either stalled out, they've run into issues, or it just simply hasn't delivered the results they expected. Some of the things to consider, we often see as a cause of this is the implementation tends to become the project, right? The goal is to implement lean instead of the results that you're trying to get from it. So you tend to just count, measure the implementation and use of tools. How many Kaizen events are we doing? How many audits are we doing? How many gimbal walks are we doing? Without focusing on the results. So people start to use the tools for the sake of using the tools without the focus on the results, and that tends to stall things out, and you just get a lot of activity that doesn't deliver what you're looking for, cost savings. So there needs to be accountability, focus, prioritization, be thoughtful on where you're applying the tools, be thoughtful of the projects you're undertaking, understand what you're getting for it, be thoughtful in applying and hold people accountable for delivering the financial results in the end. Another thing to consider is that the lean tool sets typically assume a certain foundation is there that we don't always see in low performing plants. As an example, rigorous daily management or process discipline. Many plants just don't have the habit of even following processes. So putting in a process change is going to have an impact if they don't have the disciplines to follow in the first place. So some of these fundamental behaviors need to be in place. And if they're not, you need to make sure you address that. It also typically assumes a certain level of process stability and quality that may or may not be there. Obviously, any low performing plants have incredible variability and instability in their process control. That needs to be addressed and getting under control before some of these typical tool sets will have an impact. The other thing that people often run into is that they just assume that small incremental improvements are automatically going to flow through the bottom line, which is often not the case. One, very small impacts can get lost in the broader picture, and it's very difficult to track whether they're flowing through. And that's another reason why addressing the large systemic underlying issues where there's going to be a sizable visible impact is much easier to track, and you need to consciously adjust your planning, adjust your standards, and kind of take the slack out of the system so that the plant starts to operate at that new level of improved productivity. It needs to be a very deliberate effort, and you have to rely on your management processes and the discipline of the management team in order to make sure those flow through. It's not just going to automatically flow. So something to keep in mind. I think that's the bulk of our planned comments. And I think we wanted to maybe address a couple of questions as well.
Great, yes, thank you, Steve. Let's pivot now to our panel discussion. My first question is for Parmesh. Parmesh, from your experience, how can lean be used effectively to drive savings?
Thanks, Liz. I think one of the keys we all have hit upon is set priorities, tie goals to financials. We recently started an initiative at a client where they had over 40 different projects. It was a small company. The entire team was overwhelmed with all the initiatives that they were undertaking. We decided to focus on the top 5 projects that is going to have the most financial impact. By doing that, the people were able to focus on a set targets of initiatives that was very important. They could concentrate on that, come up with solutions. And once they saw the impact from that, and I think we were seeing that we were able to generate some good bottom financial impact to the bottom line, it was a ripple effect. People were getting excited, and there were more initiatives that we were able to add, and people were willing to take on additional initiatives because they saw the value in this. Some clients that we have worked with, we have tried to set up these financial goals with incentives for people. I think there is value in trying some incentives for people's performance. When we do some of these initiatives, people get motivated by that. The another area to think about is having a project implementation program management team that focuses and drives the implementation. It is very, very key. Measuring the progress of the projects is key, and having some of your team members present to the senior executives is very important. That shows the team that there is buy-in from the overall management. So I think those are some of the key things from our experience that has led to some effective lean projects that we have managed in the past. Steve, do you have any other examples of transformation that you want to talk about?
Yeah, one other one comes to mind. I think I can offer another example of things you can do because one of the challenges, again, and certainly in our situation, we're often stepping into a situation where they've been at an effort for a number of time and they haven't delivered. So one that comes to mind, I went into a large food processing plant. They'd been at lean for a long time. The performance had not improved. They've been working 24/7 and mandatory 7-day work weeks for a long period of time. Morale was extremely low. They tried many things. They were incredibly skeptical of yet another initiative. So it was difficult to get energy, momentum, and buy-in around the things we needed to do to improve performance. So what we did is get agreement to focus on a single line and create kind of a pilot, kind of prove out the concepts and show that we could make a dramatic impact, which we're able to do in a relatively short amount of time. So we quickly got past the skepticism. People saw how much easier and it was, and to work on a line that actually operated properly and didn't have all the disruptions that they were dealing with day in and day out, and really got the team turned around. We ended up dramatically improving, doubling the OE and productivity of the plant in the matter of a short amount of time, and it was able to allow them to get the same amount of output on a single shift operation that they were in 5 days that they were trying to do in 2-shift operation in 7 days. It's dramatic. But you got to get past that first skepticism, especially in a low morale environment, and get some buy-in and people to believe that they can make a difference, and it really opened things up.
Great, thank you both. Ashray, my next question is for you. What often works well when implementing a lean program?
Thanks, Liz. Well, I think first and foremost, you need to be able to identify opportunities, right? Where is your largest opportunity? And that's something I think when we go into a client situation, we are able to do pretty quickly. And it's not just about finding opportunities that deliver immediate cash savings. You want to find areas which are scalable. So if I make a change in one part of the process, I'm then able to leverage that and spread it across the entire manufacturing network to accelerate the savings. The other thing we do is you want to stand up a project management office. It's critical that once you've identified the opportunities, you want to track its execution. If there are any delays, you want to make sure you're escalating them to the leadership. Which brings me to my third point, that having the leadership and the management engaged throughout this process is critical, and that goes back to tying this program with financial results. If you've tied your opportunities and your improvement projects to financial performance, it automatically catches the leadership's attention. And the last thing, and something that I take personal pride in, is upskilling the talent. So, one thing we do really well is when we go into a project and we implement some change, we work with the colleagues or our counterparts, the client side, to upskill their game so that when we're out of the door, they're sustaining the progress we've made and they're improving on it. I mean, I joke often that once we're out of the door, the people we work with become Excel whiz kids or Tableau whiz kids. Steve, anything you'd like to add to this?
No, I think you got all the major points. I think you've done a nice job. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ashray. Parmesh, I'd like to ask my next question to you. What are the common challenges that your clients encounter when implementing lean? Are there signs that you've learned to look for to know when an implementation may be headed off course?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I think one of the things that we look for is how much ownership has the management taken in these projects. And more often than not, there is clear lack of ownership from the management. That is one of the key reasons, in our opinion, why lean initiatives fail. There is a poor governance structure, i.e., there is no reporting that is happening, no updates that are being provided to the management. It just takes away the focus that people need to have in driving some of those initiatives. And what happens in that case is we feel that people are just going through the motion of doing the initiative. They don't do root cause analysis. There is just not in-depth analysis being done as to what can we do to improve or make an improvement for this particular project. Poor coordination, something that we see, there is not a cross-functional team. Everybody is working in a siloed environment, so they don't bring in cross-functional teams to find a solution to the problem. And one of the things that we have seen in the past is there is a lot of focus on CapEx. That is kind of everybody's clutch to show that they're making improvements as CapEx initiatives. They just put a number of CapEx initiatives, some of which don't have the kind of return on investment that you are seeing. So it is just having CapEx, capital intensive projects to make improvements is not the right solution. And typically when we go into a client and we see that there is a lot of focus on CapEx initiatives, one of the key things that we look at is which of these initiatives can we get rid of, because they are just not going to bring in the ROI that we believe is meaningful for the client. Ashray, you can walk through an example that you recently did at a client, if you don't mind, please.
Sure, yeah. So I worked with a company recently, and they had implemented Lean, but it was more of a corporate mandate. It was more of a check in the box exercise. As a result, they had not delivered their cost savings targets for the last 3 years. And now when we went in, we changed the mindset and tried to tie their Lean program to financial results. Now, what that did was that changed the conversation from, okay, how do I track a particular number, to how do I deliver results in a manner that has a step change in the financial performance of my plan, right? So very quickly, if we talk about equipment effectiveness or productivity, the conversation changed from just tracking a number because the corporate wants you to do it, to what do I need to do so that I can reduce the number of shifts I need to run in a calendar year. And so by just changing the mindset, we were able to identify, implement, and deliver not just on the savings targets, but also exceed the management or the leadership's expectations on what could be delivered from this plan.
Great, thank you both. Parmesh, have you seen an uptick in clients implementing Lean programs over the past 6 months?
I think that's a great question, especially in this current environment, right? So in March, when we were hit with the COVID situation, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of instability. Clients were focusing on safety and trying to stabilize the situation. Nobody knew what was going to happen in the coming days, weeks, etc. As time passed by, weeks, months, companies realized that they need to manage business and improve their costs. So they started focusing on cost takeout and improving their performance. So things have definitely improved over the last few months, if I may say. Clients have begun to realize that they need to get back to their usual ways of doing business. They need to take cost out. They need to do manufacturing improvements. So a lot of companies have seemed to weather the initial storm overall, and now are focused on driving the P&L type of improvements that they want to see in this kind of an environment that we are in. Steve, I don't know if you are aligned on that, or if you're seeing something similar, or if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just the reality of the economics and the financial situation for many industries and companies has forced them to really take a more pragmatic approach and not just pure philosophical, which is what we'd recommend anyway. I mean, our approach is to focus on results and not just philosophy for the sake of an initiative, right? So you need to have aggressive targets that you know you're going to get results from, and not just apply the tools because you know, everybody's accepted this is a great set of tools. I'll give you one example specifically. And in the pandemic, but previous to this, right, we'd stepped in working with a large manufacturer of agricultural equipment. of course, is a seasonal business, large equipment. They had undertaken a lean initiative and taken a very idealistic and kind of academic approach to it. They were determined to go to one-piece flow on these large, complex machines that had 2-hour tack times, and so there's a lot of work content, very complex, and an army of people to deliver the material they were purposely alternating models every single unit, models, colors, everything, to purposely randomize it. And it drove a tremendous amount of complexity and overhead just to support that line. But the reality was it was a seasonal business, and most of the machines were parked in the back lot until spring when the dealers would take them. So they were driving a tremendous amount of complexity for the sake of it, and utilizing the tools and the philosophy that it wasn't translating into any commercial advantage or cost saving. So be thoughtful about what the results you're trying to do, whether it's a competitive advantage to be flexible in the market or to take additional cost out or reduce inventory, and apply the right tool to achieve that results. Don't just use the tools for the sake of using the tools. So I think, coming back to your point, in this environment, I think with the financial reality, I think I see clients coming to us with more pragmatic view and looking for results, and open to leveraging lean and other tools to get those results, but not just using tools for the sake of using the tools. So we would always emphasize that. I think you just have to be constantly use data to prioritize where your efforts are. There's always limited resources. There's more to do than there are people to do it. So you have to prioritize in order to have a big impact. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing the momentum and not getting the results that you're looking for.
Great, thank you. I'd like to now pivot to taking some of our attendee questions. Thank you all for submitting questions. As a reminder, please use the Q&A function to continue submitting questions. This first one is for you, Parmesh. How do you get leadership buy-in in these types of initiatives?
I think the biggest way to get leadership buy-in is showing the financial impact that it can add to the bottom line. That is probably that is their motivation. In other cases, there are clients who are looking to upskill their talent. So basically saying that we're going through this initiative, we may be able to identify some of their top performers who can do better in this kind of a situation. So helping them identify talent who can manage this. And then, of course, debottlenecking the process or improving their OEE, etc. Those are the kind of things that excite them the most. But I think for the senior management, it is showing them the financial impact that adds to the bottom line. And then also, in some cases, getting them involved in the day-to-day activities of what's going on the shop floor adds a significant amount of value for the people, to show them that senior management is serious about the impact that they want to see, and them seeing on the shop floor, whether it is through Gemba walks or some other initiative, is very important. And those are the kind of things that I believe gets leadership excited in doing these kind of initiatives. Steve, I know you probably have some thoughts on that also.
Yeah, I think I would agree with everything that you said. And I think you align incentives of the leadership, right? So don't be very practical about it, right? But the reality is that people are motivated by what's going to also enable them financially. So we've often get situations, if the leadership is incentivized around different objective than what we're trying to achieve, obviously they're not going to have the energy and momentum behind it and the buy-in from the management team. So take a broad look, business-wide, what are we trying to achieve? Make sure the incentives and bonuses are aligned around that to get everybody on the same page and driving to the same goals.
Great, thank you. Steve, this next question is for you. Is there anything you can say about stalled initiatives? How do you help re-energize a stalled initiative?
Sure. Alluded to it a little bit earlier in the example I gave in the food plant, where, often run into situations where they're very demoralized. They've been at it for a couple of years in many cases and haven't gotten the results. So you end up with low morale, a lot of skepticism, right? So it starts from the top, like we've mentioned before, right? So starts with top-down engagement from the management team. It can't just be an operations initiative, right? It's a company-wide transformation. Everybody can affect it. Everybody can affect the performance of operations. It can't just be everything on their back, or it becomes kind of a separate program that other people don't have accountability for. And focus on, you get some big wins, right? Some quick wins to get people energized, convinced, believe in that we actually can move the needle, right? So look for those systemic issues, find a target that you know you can impact, do it quickly, reward people, engage people, get visibility around it, and all those other things to get people motivated. But you have to find a way to get an impact quickly, to get people convinced that this is going to work, whether it's focusing on a single line or machine, but eventually it needs to address everything broadly. So you have to find the balance between diluting yourself in something you can't affect by taking on too big, but also if you stay so focused and incremental, it's not going to have enough impact to really have practical impact on the financial results. So you got to find that balance and pick your battles. So look at the data, find where your big opportunities are, find those systemic issues, find the right place to go after, so get some momentum and you'll get the buy-in.
Great, thank you, Steve. Ashray, how do you sustain the changes that these initiatives bring?
Well, the first thing you got to do is once you've implemented an initiative, you've got to make it a part of your management process. So you need to update your playbooks, your standard procedures, and your training material. You know, it's critical that your new talent that you're hiring is up to speed on the new culture, the new change that you've impacted. You want to set the right performance metrics, because what you don't track, you're not going to improve on. And have the right meeting cadence to review those metrics, right? So if it warrants a daily meeting, have a daily meeting. If it warrants a weekly or a monthly, organize that. But you want the leadership to stay focused on it, because that's an important check and balance that you need to have in place, that leadership is tracking the progress, helping eliminate any pitfalls or roadblocks that you might see along the way, making the right investments in talent that is required to sustain these changes. And lastly, I would say is, celebrate the results. You've set a target, you've achieved it, celebrate with your team, and then set an even higher goal or an objective for yourself.
Great. Ashray, this next question is for you as well. Can you elaborate on how you use Lean to impact indirect overhead expenses? For instance, do you introduce Lean accounting principles?
Sure. Actually, Steve is a pro at doing this. Steve, do you mind taking this? You do this all the time, and I know.
Yeah. I'd say my first reaction is less about the counting than the actual true costs of the indirect labor. As we cautioned earlier, right? You can be careful not to just trade off, taking cost out of direct labor and replacing it with indirect labor, right? There's a tendency with a lot of these structures that you're trying to simplify and take things off the line to make it more efficient for the direct labor. Make sure you don't all just translate that into indirect labor. You're not really saving much. And within those functions, like we mentioned here, you need to take a close look at those support functions, because there's likely opportunity as well. There's a lot of, take a look at the activities that they're doing, making sure that you're staffed for what they really need to achieve. You can lean out those activities as well. You can apply some of the same tools to the material handling activities and address the support functions. Even engineering, even if it's not just a set of Lean tools, right? All those functions you should take a look at and making sure they're efficient and set them up to be efficient. Whatever tool set is the right one to have. So I think my answer to the question is you should take a look at all the support functions, whether it's Lean tools or whatever tool set is most appropriate. You need to make them all productive, so you're not just, again, direct labor could be a small portion of the overall cost structure, so you need to take a look at all the support functions as well to really take a look at your whole P&L.
So if I may also add to that, We all recently instituted a checkbook process at a client where we went through all the different cost structure other than the direct labor and the indirect labor. You have utilities costs. This client had a lot of utility costs. So we were basically looking at through our cost structure. We installed the checkbook process on a weekly basis. We were looking at our costs compared to, and the client wasn't, had cash constraints. So basically by installing the checkbook process, we were able to keep tabs on every cost that we were incurring and making sure that nothing is going above our budget, or we are going to be able to beat some of our costs that we had in the budget. Example would be MRO variable cost. So just having that kind of focus helped us manage our cost structure a lot more efficiently. And I think especially for indirect costs, that is very, very important depending on the situation you are in.
Great, thank you both. Parmesh, this next question is for you. How can Lean help with scaling a new manufacturing operation where there is no history of bad or good practices?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the things I enjoy doing is going into this kind of environment where there is no good or bad operation, and teaching them what really good is very, very important. For example, we have a meeting structure that we have established, which is start putting the hour by hour boards. Then how does that result into the daily meeting? Then how does that result into the weekly meeting? I think building a structure, a building block to those kind of organizations are extremely important. Teaching people how to do Gemba walks and what to look for in that kind of matter. I think there's just plenty of those kind of opportunities in an environment where we kind of can go in and look at how can we impact and build some good practices in the organization, which will help them from a long-term perspective. I've done a couple of initiatives recently where I had the opportunity to go in where the client just did not have any systems, anything in place, and we were able to teach them, this is how we do the hour by hour board. This is how we do the daily tiered meeting. This is how we convert that into the weekly meeting. Those kind of things are, I think, very important in building a structured process that will help the company in the long term. Steve, I know you kind of have done some of those also, so maybe you can share some of your thoughts.
Absolutely. We always focus on the fundamental management processes because that's the only way it's going to sustain, and that's the only way you're going to get comprehensive. It needs to become the way you work, right, and the way you run the plan. It can't just be a separate initiative or separate program. That's not part of how you run the business every day. It needs to be integrated. So it needs to be something you buy into. It needs to do something that works for the management team. They have to have the right information to make good data-driven decisions, and a foundational structure that forces the discipline and sustainability of that decision-making and those improvements.
I think I'll just add to that. We love going to those kind of places because we feel that when we go in there in that kind of an environment, we just can help the client tremendously, and seeing the people learn the process is very gratifying and satisfying.
Great. We've got one last question. I think Steve and/or Parmesh, you can answer this one. Lean is often practiced in a siloed manner for individual process areas, not the entire organizational system. What can be done to change this?
Steve, you
want to go? I think you heard us echo this, repeat this numerous times today. In our opinion, it needs to start with management and needs to be part of how you run the business. When you approach it in a siloed way, function by function, you're not going to have the impact, the buy-in, and the reality is all those functions affect each other, right? Everything is cross-functional in a business, right? Operations can't work in a silo. They need support from engineering and materials and planning, and all the other functions affect their abilities to succeed. So if you're approaching it in a siloed way, function by function, it's likely to struggle, and it's not going to have the support and buy-in from management. It needs to be start at the top and be integrate and flow through to all the way up and all the way down on how you're making decisions and how you're interacting with the different functions to be productive.
And I think just to add, agree with everything you said, Steve. one thing to add is we make sure when we go into this kind of an environment, we try to build a cross-functional team. If we create different work streams, we try to make sure there is somebody from manufacturing, somebody from maintenance, somebody from the warehouse involved, because that's kind of how you get the best ideas together on the shop floor and make the biggest impact to the client's bottom line. So, it is basically, it is a change in mindset, building a cross-functional team, setting that up in a manner that you have multiple people from different teams, from different departments working together, probably is, and it takes a while to get that for those kind of people to work together. But it is important that that we establish different people from different groups working together, which will help us have a successful project overall.
Excellent, thank you. I think that was actually a really good question to wrap up on. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our speakers, Steve, Ashray, Parmesh. As a reminder, we will be sending out the link to the recording, and it will be made available online as well. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.